is Miyoung Chun, Executive Vice President of Science Programs at the Kavli Foundation. And today we will be discussing with scientists who proposed to create a national network of neurotechnology centers, where these centers could provide a critical interdisciplinary environment with many scientists from different expertise working together, and they'll be developing a large-scale technology in a centralized fashion, and then share the facilities with the entire scientific community. These scientists call these centers as the brain observatories. Now, this happens quite regularly for physical science research, but this idea is quite revolutionary idea for brain research. Today, we're lucky to have 4 scientists who proposed this idea. Rafael Yuste, who is a neuroscientist at Columbia, Michael Roukes, who is a physicist at Caltech, Paul Alivisatos, who is a chemist at Berkeley, and myself, as I was also a co-author of the paper. So together, we hope to discuss this exciting new idea and why we see this as an important next step to catalyzing research about the brain. Welcome, Michael, Rafa, and Paul. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you.
Hi. A quick reminder before we get started. If you have a question for our panel, please send it by email to info@kavlifoundation.org or tweet us using the hashtag KavliLive. We'll get to as many questions as we can. Okay, Rafa, Michael, and Paul, we were actually all part of the team that proposed the Brain Activity Map project, which sparked the Brain Initiative. Before we discuss our proposal for a network of neurotechnology centers, could you introduce our, participants here? What is the Brain Initiative and where is it today? Rafa?
Hello, everyone. So the Brain Initiative is a large-scale scientific project to develop tools for neuroscience. And the reason to do that is that you could argue that neuroscience, in spite of the great advances, hasn't yet cracked the problem of understanding how the brain works in normal animals, normal people, or in diseased patients. And there's some serious argument to be made that the reason is a technical one, that neuroscientists or clinicians just haven't had the right tools. Now, if you look around in the scientific environment, who are the people that build tools, build methods? And you always look at the physical scientists. Physics, engineering, chemistry, math, statistics have traditionally been the bedrock of technology development that has then passed on to biology and medicine and revolutionized fields. A recent example is the Human Genome Project that changed biology and has changed medicine. So for that reason, the logical proposal is, well, let's just try to come up with a model of funding and collaboration where we can bring all these physical scientists into neuroscience on a timescale of maybe a decade or two, so that they can develop the tools that we need, so that maybe the next generation of neuroscientists and clinicians can go and finally crack the brain and understand how it works and fix all these problems with the patients.
Michael?
So we began the Brain Initiative project after having a group of us get together spanning different disciplines. I'm from the physical sciences. And one of the interesting things that was apparent when we first got together back in 2011 was that there are lots of advances in nanoscience that can now be put together to make entirely new tools to help the next generation of neuroscientists and neuroscience research do things that have never been possible before. But it needed a nudge of organization, and it also needed a source of funding, which is difficult because we're bringing together different disciplines. So that's sort of the background. The Brain Initiative was engendered by our initial work, and has created nationwide a group of researchers that are actually pursuing some first advances in this area. But more recently, this recent paper and white paper that we drafted together focuses on the need for a coherence that is more, as Rafa mentioned, is more akin to the physical sciences rather than neuroscience, where we build telescopes and observatories, satellites to do scientific research. And this requires a different level of organization, concatenation of technologies, people working together, and that's what we're calling for in this next round of thoughts that we've broadcast and that we're talking about today.
If I can say something to follow up on Michael quickly. So the Brain Initiative today is on its second year. There are at least 125 labs in the US working on this with federal funding coming from NIH, NSF, DARPA. Amount of federal funding has been $100 million this first year, 300 estimated for the second year, and this is ramping up to potentially 500 for the third year. So we're talking 500 million a year for a decade at least. So this is the type of large-scale funding which, although it makes sense to carve a part of this to see individual projects in different labs, we thought it also makes sense to use that part of funding to create something that doesn't exist, which are these ideas of centralized technology development centers that we call the Brain Observatories.
So, Paul?
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm very excited about the Brain Initiative because to me it represents the very best of what our societies can do, or what our society can do, which is to really look at a problem that is very, very deep for science, but also having an enormous potential impact on people. And the fact is that we're making, as a community, as a science community, tremendous advances in learning about the brain, but it still also remains elusive. It's very hard for us to understand at some level how the spatial organization of the brain and its electrical and chemical functions, how they work as a system, is still very hard for us to understand. And yet, at the same time, we have very exciting tools that have been developed by the neuroscience community. We have 15 years now of the nanoscience revolution, which gives us a whole new set of tools for making small probes and for examining what happens on very small length scales with a lot of integration. And finally, we have a tremendous development going on in the ability to collect large amounts of data and to do computation on it in order to extract from it interesting information that 20 or even 10 or maybe even 5 years ago would have been overwhelming to the science community, and yet today we can do all of that. So to me, the three strands of the neuroscience, the nanoscience, and the computing and the data all come together in this Brain Initiative, and it's very exciting what Rafa was just mentioning, that there are over 100 laboratories in the U.S. that are part of a kind of an umbrella of cooperation to bring all these disciplines together and to really go after this problem. I think it's inspiring, and I think it really is something that we all should be trying to foster, that we should be successful in the next decade in coming away with an understanding of the brain that just has not existed until now.
I mean, in that perspective, I think Rafa and Michael already alluded a little bit, but maybe we can now discuss the idea of what we're calling brain observatories. Now, we've heard telescope observatories and so on, but what could brain observatory mean?
Yeah. So let me take this question. So the viewers can probably see behind me, this is a 2-photon microscope. And it took us a group of people a lot of time to put it together, require funding, but this is still a small lab operation. With this microscope, we can image a little portion of the brain of a mouse, the visual cortex, maybe 100, 300 neurons, and watch what they do. Okay, so, and like this lab, there are dozens of labs around the country, around the world, many funded by the Brain Institute, to carry out these types of studies and to develop this method. But the magnitude of where we are and where we need to get to, it's enormous. Even the primary visual cortex of the mouse has 180,000 neurons. Okay, so this is just not going to happen in individual labs. We want to track it. So the Brain Observatories is a centralized facility, similar to the astronomical observatories, where big equipments are designed and put together in a way that individual labs cannot do. And those become both the source of the technology development for large-scale instruments and also for technology sharing, so that anyone, like in an astronomical observatory, everyone can go there with their preparation, with their clinical cases, and study those brains with the tools that it just won't happen in individual laboratories or universities. So it is copying the model of the physical sciences, like a particle accelerator, supercomputers, astronomical observatories, even the genome centers that were created at the national labs are a good model for what we have in mind.
Well, I mean, Paul, you are indeed actually a director of Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. You actually practice this kind of science daily in your work.
Yes.
What is the national lab like, and how could a national lab activity for brain research be different from now? I think that Rafa just mentioned about how his 2-photon facilities are in his own lab, or used by only a few people, and so on. What's the contrasting way of doing science at the national lab?
Yes. Well, you know, I'm sitting, I don't know if you can see it since Rafa pointed out where he is. Right behind me is a wall of pictures from the early days, and you can see E.O. Lawrence. He invented the cyclotron, and it was a little device that he could hold in his hand. And then he realized that he calculated that it would be possible to make them enormous. The biggest one today, of course, is in Switzerland, the Large Hadron Collider. And he realized that they could become enormous, and then he realized right away, and it's actually very fascinating, that if he wanted to see that happen, he would have to create a new model for how to do science, in which the instruments were created in common by many people with all of their creativity going into that, but then everyone would be able to use the instruments, and it would be open, sharing, connected, you know, and it's a way of bringing all the talent to bear on a scale that is larger than what any individual research group can do. And today we benefit from that in so many disciplines. We see that there are many cases where if we come together as a community, bringing together you know, the experts in a particular topic, but also people who are engineers and the support folks all together into one family that works hard to make a, you know, then we can create a technology that's far stronger, far more robust. And then that technology is open for people to share, but also becomes something that gets disseminated and you know, broadly used. Take the Human Genome Project as an example, where we saw this very large effort to create sequencing on a big scale. But today that has resulted in sequencing being available at very low cost with very simple instruments that are on a desktop. That's really the kind of vision that one has for what a brain observatory could accomplish. It could allow us to create a new level of instrumentation far beyond what can be created in an individual laboratory. But ultimately, presumably, it will have in it all kinds of ideas that are new and that will be available to everyone, not just on the central machine, but potentially also on machines that are in everybody's laboratory all over the place, because we'll figure out how to miniaturize them, how to make them more cost-effective, and so on. So I see it as a natural process, and this is something that the national labs excel at doing. They're built to create these kinds of teams. So they are very special organizations, and you know, I don't want to say that I know the way in which to create this particular structure for the neurotechnology centers. There may be several ways to do it, but the national labs that the Department of Energy created are certainly great models.
Well, I mean, this sounds really, I think, compelling. But Michael, you are already generating wonderful tools for, let's say, measuring brain activities and so on your own, within your own lab, with your own collaborators, and actually being very successful. So why would you want to also being part of these scientists proposing actually much bigger neurotechnology center?
Well, there's a great tradition in nanoscience and in physical sciences for really advanced innovations to be made that are, you know, really blue sky science. Once you make these first advances, to assemble them into a robust system, a new tool that could be used in, for example, research in neuroscience or biological science research, it takes more engineering and development. First of all, to figure out how to make them robust, you know, from the first spark, the first proof of concept in the laboratory, and then to assemble these with other systems to make complex tools. The brain, after all, is one of the most complex things that we know about, with its 100 billion neurons, and each one of these connected to 1,000 or 10,000 individual synapses. This is just frighteningly complex, but we have to start somewhere. Neuroscience really has a tradition of individual investigators working and developing special techniques, you know, having their own secret sauces, their own secret recipes for doing science. And this has been very great for doing small-scale neuroscience. But now we're, you know, facing the next frontier of actually looking how lots of neurons connect into brain circuits and how the information is actually processed in these brain circuits. And for these, we need more complex tools. This is what we're alluding to by saying brain observatories. So the national laboratories has been one paradigm for actually, you know, for particle accelerators, for actually building these kind of tools. There's another paradigm as well that's been very effective, which is groups of investigators banding together and being supported by NASA, for example, for building satellites for doing space-based observatories, or the National Science Foundation for building observatories, for example, at the South Pole that you called Ice Cube, that looks at neutrinos coming from outer space, and so on. And just like building the accelerators that Paul talked about, often the parts, the individual bits of engineering and physical sciences that go into building these big tools come from the sparks of single investigator science. And so all of us maintain that single investigator science is going to be key. But when you try to assemble them, there needs to be a process. There needs to be a coherence. And this coherence is not yet sort of within the neuroscience or neurotechnology tool development thing. And so this is what we're pointing out. Miyoung, you mentioned my own research. So we've developed over the past 15 years different tools, for example, at the Kavli Nanoscience Institute at Caltech. But with graduate students and postdocs, you know, we can make a few tools at a time, but that's not what you want to take into the neuroscience laboratory with you. What you want to take in to the neuroscience laboratory is many boxes of tools that are all the same, perform, you know, perfectly, and you're not limited by the tools to actually do the neuroscience that you want. And so it becomes necessary to, in some sense, spin off the new technologies that we create to the factories that build computer chips or build components for advanced microscopes, to have them, to work with them to actually develop the new tools to create these things. So it's interesting also to think about, you know, in particular, this one observatory for neutrinos that's at the South Pole, funded by the NSF. It's led by one university that sort of centralizes a large group of external, or at other universities and places, researchers that are building parts, but they're working coherently as a team. And one of the wonderful things about these scientific observatories, whether they're built in the national laboratories or built by coherent groups of researchers, is everybody is so passionate about building these things. Often they come in ahead of schedule and under budget and perform, you know, with, you know, even exceeding the original expectations that people have. And so we're very enthusiastic and optimistic about all the sort of points of light, all the great advances that are being made now in the BRAIN initiative in neurotechnology. And our hope, you know, our call is to bring coherence to the process so we can, following the great tradition of building accelerators and building telescopes, build new tools for measuring brain circuits.
So, well, Rafa, I have a question to you now. Connecting to, I think, what had been mentioned by Paul and Michael, mentioning about LHC in particle physics field or in astrophysics field, where in their case, their questions are somewhat very unified among the scientific community. For example, finding dark matter, dark energy, or neutrino, you know, measuring them, maybe weight of neutrino, for example, or finding Higgs boson. And it required, I mean, it was almost necessity of their scientific field to make one large collider. What are such questions in neuroscience?
Yeah, so the utmost important question is a general model of how the brain works. Let's say in my field, the cerebral cortex. We don't have that. Again, you could say that maybe it's just impossible or too hard, but maybe it's just that we don't have the right tools. And for that to happen, our idea is, okay, let's build the tools to map all the circuits. So this is called like connectomics, but not the connectomics that are being done now, but large-scale connectomics, so you can map the entire brain of an animal, for example. Or let's build the tools to record from every neuron using nanoprobes, using the best that nanoscience has to offer. Or let's build optical tools with lasers that have to be specifically designed to really capture the activity, and optical system to capture the activity of these neurons in 3 dimensions as a function of time, or tools to hoist all the data and mine it properly so that we can actually extract the variables that we need. So those are enabling tools to the ultimate goal, which is to build these models, computational models or circuit models that can give us the understanding of the brain enough so that we can predict and cure problems in the brain. And so those are very, so although the ultimate goal is diffuse in the sense, no one can tell you today, we cannot honestly tell people today, oh, this is going to be a theory, or it's going to look like that. No, we don't even know yet how to build a theory because we haven't had the data, because we haven't had the tools. So if I were a taxpayer, okay, I am a taxpayer, and I look at the BRAIN initiative, said, okay, these guys are going to spend, the government's going to spend $6 billion over 10, 12 years to try to crack these fundamental problems of technologies to enabling discovering how the brain works, and this is going to be of historical importance. The minute that mankind understand how the brain works, it will be the first time that we understand ourselves from the inside. And then you look at individual labs like mine. I mean, we don't run I would say a bad operation here, but if you look behind me, there are mask tape, there's tape holding parts of the microscopes. And I can tell you other labs like this are cutting edge and they get Nobel Prizes. No? So it's not that we're slouch here, but this is just not the right level for certain tools. And the taxpayer can say, well, don't we have enough money to actually build in neuroscience the same type of 21st century big science projects that we do in physics or astronomy? We can send a satellite in space. Why can't we build a microscope to image all the activity from every neuron in the brain of an animal? If I mean, in one of these meetings, the White House that we had at the beginning of the Brain Initiative, they pointed out that was the week that the rover landed in Mars. So they said, okay, well, we can actually land this baby in Mars flawlessly. Okay, why can't we? Why do we have to operate under, I wouldn't say a shoestring in neuroscience, but in a mental model of how to do science, which is just not ambitious enough compared to what other sciences are doing.
Well, let's be a little more, apologies. Let's be a little more specific here, in a sense that because you mentioned about taxpayers' perspective, and I think that's a very important thing for us to always remember, in a sense that at the end of the day, a lot of these funding opportunities come from federal funding, especially for envisioning this National Neurotechnology Center. It might indeed possibly be in national labs, such as where Paul is now. I would like us to ground it a little bit and trying to even attempt to answer. If indeed we understand much more about how brain functions, what would it mean to people, you know, who are our uncles and aunts who might not be a neuroscientist and other scientists? What do you think it means to them?
So if I can speak again, and I promise I won't take all the time, but I was originally trained in medicine, and I had to rotate in psychiatry, part of my training, and I had to deal with patients that were paranoid schizophrenics. And this was a very sobering experience for me personally because these patients were smart. You could tell there wasn't anything really wrong with their brains. They had a brain as good as yours, okay? But it was off a little bit. So instead of developing their lives in a way that is productive for society, they caused this tremendous devastation. So we have today, in spite of all the heroic efforts of the psychiatrists and the neurologists, most of the diseases that affect the brain we cannot do anything about these patients because we don't understand the pathophysiology, the way this tissue goes already. And because we don't understand this problem, we cannot fix it. So I think mental diseases and neurological diseases affect a large proportion of mankind, and this proportion is increasing as the population is aging. So for the person on the street, like every one of the people that's listening to us, knows personally people that have mental disease or neurological diseases in their families and their friends, if you want to help them, it's better to do it from the basic science point of view, develop the tools to get the science so that the doctors and the clinicians can actually understand the problem and fix it.
So if I could add to what Rafa said, one of my colleagues, a neuroscience colleague at Caltech, likened in a talk that he gave at TEDx Caltech Brain, likened the system-wide drugs that we currently have, you know, for psychiatric disorders, to sort of pouring motor oil all over the motor instead of actually delivering it exactly to where the parts that need to be lubricated. And so this idea of actually interrogating brain circuits and understanding exactly the focal points of these kinds of disorders, which we don't know today, could really transform how care is provided for the people that Rafa described.
So actually, we have met a 30-minute session that we're supposed to be. If you wouldn't mind, I would love to actually extend our session maybe 10 minutes more. Especially, I have this wonderful question where I think viewer asked, would these tools be good for studying something other than the brain? I think this is a great question to Paul, because at the end of the day, you are part of Department of Energy. What are we doing studying brain at the Energy Institute?
Thank you for this question. You know, it's a fascinating question. Actually, you know, the Department of Energy was involved in a very, very critical way in creating the Genome Initiative. And that was done, again, because of the potential to impact human health. And we see that revolution really continuing to gain momentum every day. The fact that we can now sequence people's DNA and its cost is becoming lower and lower. It's really helping all of us to think so much better about disease. But it turns out that when that finished, the ability to sequence also allowed us to understand what happens inside plants and what happens inside microbes and other species. So as we deal with the issues of climate change, for example, we would like to know what plants are likely to survive under given stresses, and what could we do to alter the situation so that as a given environment is stressed, are there ways in which we can help it to remain robust? And so much of the genomics capability is impacting that it's turned out that it's had a huge impact, the sequencing, outside of human health, but in areas of energy and environment. I think something very much like that would happen if we think about the ability to measure with an electrochemical sensor that we might have inside a brain, to measure from 1 million or so of those all at once. Imagine that being placed inside soil and allowing us to get a picture of how microbes talk to each other inside a soil. What molecules are they passing back and forth? How are they interacting with each other? How are they creating the environment that enables a plant to thrive? I think that could play a very important role for us. We may be able someday to manipulate plants so that they can fix nitrogen and not need fertilizers. We may be able, through that kind of knowledge, to learn so much that you know, we don't know presently. So I think that these tools that we're talking about will have many, many applications in areas beyond the area of the brain, and I think that's a fascinating possibility for us. Of course, meanwhile, what Rafa said a moment ago, so many of us, practically all of us, I assume, have loved ones who are, you know, really suffering from neurological diseases. So I think that you know, the case for societal impact is just really so strong here that to me it feels like there's a compelling need for us to really try to do the best we can to create these new instruments. These are ones that are going to change the world.
Wonderful. Actually, we have another wonderful question that came in, and it's, I think, a great question to Michael. What is like for all these different fields to be working together? I mean, Michael, you are among the physicists, one of the most established physicists, and when you go to neuroscience community and ask who's Michael Roukes, they will not know your name, and yet you're practicing and combining these seemingly disparate fields as one. It's wonderful and inspiring for observers to see, but what is it like to actually having your students who are well trained in physics to all of a sudden asking key questions in neuroscience? How has it been like for you?
Well, one of the great things about this idea of cross-disciplinary science that we're calling for in the development of these new tools is that, you know, people, disciplines sort of stay in their own silos, they stay in their own fields, and when you bring people together, there's multiple years that are involved with people. You know, first it's Tower of Babel. We don't understand each other, we don't understand each other's terms, and we certainly don't understand each other's motivations. You know, what are the high-profile, important problems? But as we learn to interact with each other and speak the same language and understand what motivates each of us and what their aspirations are, there's a wonderful sort of commonality, a common purpose that emerges, where we bring all of these strengths from the different disciplines together. This is incredibly powerful and incredibly exciting. And some of us, have been doing this for the last 10 or 15 years, small pockets of activity, these cross-disciplinary activities. But the BRAIN Initiative has been wonderful because it has engendered a larger group of people to actually begin to participate. So it's been fun, it's been difficult, it's been really learning, the whole time, but no one is ever too old to learn and, change what their focus is, and there's incredible power in actually bringing all this disparate strengths from right field and left field together, to create a new science, and that's what's happening. It's very exciting.
Wonderful. Well, time has come for us to close this session. What do you think, this is actually a question to all three of you, what do you think should be the specific next step that needs to happen for your idea of having this large neurotechnology center possible? Rafa?
I think what we wanted to do is to jumpstart the discussion among the neuroscientists and among the policy to look into this idea and flesh it out. Just like it happened with our initial proposal of the map, which we launched as the seed idea that became the BRAIN Initiative, but there was a period in which the initial idea was then worked out by the community of neuroscientists with a lot of meetings and a lot of interaction back and forth between the science administrators, different fields of neuroscientists, and then it was reborn again with a very concrete plan that is now being implemented. So I think this would be a very logical next step. Now, sort of open up the discussion. Now let's look at it carefully. It's going to be could be a lot of money involved, a lot of investment, a long-term plan. It could change neuroscience. It could change the history of mankind if these tools really deliver what we think they could. So there's no rush, but then let's bring everyone on board. And if the, let's say, the national laboratories from the Department of Energy or individual universities or a new type of organization of foundations, if they converge then it will be a very exciting step, and then you can essentially start working on it.
Great.
So I presume this.
We're a bit of in rush because we have to actually close our session. So could I have actually a few words from Michael and then finish up with Paul? Michael?
So there are two things that I'll just quickly say about this. The first is that, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
The first is that the history of physical science is really experimentally driven, despite what the theorist will tell you. And there's a wonderful synergy that after we observe our universe and our world, then we can actually, based on the observations we make, begin to build concrete theories about what it is that we're seeing. And so the first thing is that we're saying we want to observe more, we want to observe at a finer scale, we want to observe deeply. Now, what exactly are the exact nature of the tools? We will say we know the general outlines today, but we don't exactly know. We'd like to develop stages of complexity of the tools, and there's beginning to be, through the BRAIN Initiative, gathering people together, a wonderful dialogue of what's possible today, what's possible 5 years from now, 10 years from now, to figure out what these stages are. There's one more thing, too, that from the physical sciences side we can say, is that we know that it takes to build these complex tools 5 or 10 years. So if we wait for 10 years to decide what it is we should look at, we're going to have to wait another 10 years to actually build the tools. So we have the general outlines of where to start. I think we can build a consensus, and that's what we're trying to do in the BRAIN Initiative, what the first targets should be. Those are not set yet. And then we can do this in stages, and our message is we should start now to do this.
Paul, some final words?
Okay. Well, I'd like to remind all those who are listening that it is possible to really change the world by coming together and working to a common purpose. And the brain still represents to us one of the great unknowns, but it's a great unknown that's within reach. It's within reach if we work together as a community. It's much further out of reach if we remain more fragmented. So I would invite all of those who are listening to join with us and to become part of the community that works together to grasp what is so close to us now and to help us make it happen.
On that profound note, well, thank you very much for all of you, and hopefully this idea could be a really topic that can be discussed by many scientists, and also public would like to join. That will be a wonderful opportunity. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.